3 months ago, I flew across the country to surprise the man I thought I'd spend forever with. Instead, I got a baby, a lie, and a locked door. So I played the part, held the child he made behind my back, smiled through the betrayal, and made my own plans. Now he's the one standing at the door, stunned, reading the wedding invite with his brother's name on it. I thought he'd cry when he saw me at the gate. That's how I imagined it. His eyes would go wide, he'd drop whatever he was holding, and I'd run into his arms like a woman in a movie who didn't know heartbreak was waiting 3 scenes later. I bought the flight with my own money, wrapped the ring box in tissue paper and tucked it inside my carry-on like a secret. I wasn't ready to speak aloud. It wasn't a proposal yet, but I thought maybe it would be. 5 years of long-distance loyalty had to mean something. And I loved him like it did. I loved him like loyalty still meant something. The kind of love where you don't need a reason. You just keep showing up. The airport in Connecticut was smaller than I remembered, almost provincial with its peeling signage and whispering corridors, but that made it feel intimate, like the moment was waiting for me. I stood by the arrival doors for 10 minutes, then 15, then 20. I checked my phone, no texts, no missed calls. Maybe traffic. Maybe nerves. I told myself 1,000 soft lies to hold off the one hard truth that was building, quiet and invisible, like steam behind a shut door. Then I saw her. A woman in a pressed navy coat, dark lipstick like a wound, heels too high for comfort. She had that kind of wealth that doesn't bend its back to meet you. And she had his eyes. I recognized her from the photos on his bookshelf. The mother he always said kept to herself. She walked toward me with a look that told me this wasn't an accident. She was here instead of him, which meant something had already gone wrong. "I see you came," she said, voice sharp enough to cut itself.
No greeting. No smile.
Just that tone, like I'd crossed a line I didn't know existed. She didn't wait for a reply before thrusting a bundled infant carrier into my arms. I barely caught it, instinct overpowering confusion. The baby stirred, eyes sealed shut, a bow of drool across its tiny mouth. I stared down at it, my mind blank, heart full of something I didn't yet have a name for. "You must be here to meet your fiancé's daughter," she added.
No emotion. No apology.
Just data. And then she turned.
Come.
The car's running. I wanted to ask 100 questions. I wanted to drop the carrier and run. But I followed her, because that's what you do when the floor disappears and you haven't accepted the fall. The baby gurgled in my arms as we walked through the terminal. I told myself there was some mistake, some logical twist to the story that would make it hurt less. Maybe the baby was adopted. Maybe it was a cousin's. Maybe he was doing someone a favor. But none of the maybes could explain why she said fiancé's daughter like it was a final sentence, not a setup for clarification. The car outside was black and silent. She opened the back door without looking at me. "Buckle her in," she said. Not the baby. Her. Like I already knew her name. Like I was supposed to know any of this. The drive was wordless. She didn't ask me about my flight. I didn't ask her about the baby. We just sat in the thick, mutual understanding of something neither of us was ready to say aloud. The streets grew wider and quieter the farther we got from the city. Trees flanked the road like watchmen. Gated communities emerged behind brick walls and coded entries. Eventually, we pulled into a wide circular driveway, too pristine to feel lived in. The house was white, sterile, huge. I wondered if he'd ever mentioned owning a place like this. I couldn't remember. My memory suddenly felt full of holes. Inside, the air smelled like eucalyptus and starch. Not a single photo on the walls. Not a fingerprint on the polished staircase. She led me up without a word, heels clicking like a metronome. At the top of the stairs, she opened a door. The nursery was pale gray with gold trim. A name stenciled above the crib. Isla. I stared at it like it might change if I blinked hard enough. She took the baby from me and set her down with clinical ease. Then she turned and looked me dead in the face. "You're not leaving until you understand how this family works." She closed the door. I heard the click of the lock from the outside. I didn't scream. I didn't pound the door. I sat on the edge of the rocking chair and tried to feel the floor again. Tried to breathe. I hadn't even seen him yet. Hadn't heard his voice, touched his face, asked him why. And somehow that made it worse. The silence. The distance. The fact that he didn't even care enough to deliver the betrayal himself. I looked at the baby in the crib. She stirred, sucking her fist in slow rhythm. and I felt something cold unfurl in my chest. Not hatred, not even heartbreak, just the quiet certainty that nothing I believed was ever real. I checked my phone. Still no messages. My flight confirmation blinked at me, useless now. The ring box in my bag felt radioactive. I didn't cry. I hadn't earned the tears yet. I just sat there listening to the baby breathe, counting the seconds like maybe time itself would split open and give me an answer. But it didn't. Just kept going. So did I. Because sometimes when everything breaks at once, you don't shatter. You sharpen. The door stayed locked for 3 days. I stopped checking after the second. There was food delivered on trays like I was being observed from behind glass. Oatmeal the first morning, a grilled sandwich the next, soup on the third, always warm, never spoken for. A key never turned. A voice never called through. Only the baby broke the silence. And even she seemed uncertain, waking up in sobs, then falling back asleep like she knew better than to expect comfort. I changed her, fed her, held her, not because I wanted to play mother, but because she was the only thing in that house more confused than I was. Isla. Her name sat like static on my tongue. I didn't say it. Not yet. Saying it would be something permanent. Something forgiven. On the second night, I took inventory of the room. Not just the items, but the absences. No books. No receipts. No personal artifacts. The drawers were stocked with new onesies and sealed baby wipes. As if someone knew I was coming and prepped the nursery like a trap. The rocking chair creaked on one side only. The window opened just enough to let in air but not escape. The thermostat reset at midnight, cold creeping in whether I wanted it or not. And the phone signal was dead. Not weak dead. Like the house had been wired to silence the outside world. I had stepped into a fairy tale designed by a narcissist. All appearances, no exits. I didn't scream. Not because I wasn't scared, but because I understood something most people don't until it's too late. Some people don't raise their voices when they're trapped. They get quiet. They survive. By the third morning I knew what she was doing. His mother. Her cruelty was too intentional to be passive. The meals, the silence, the locked door. It wasn't neglect. It was conditioning. She wanted me to bond with the baby. To develop a rhythm. To forget who I was before I walked through that door. Every hour I stayed made it harder to justify leaving. And somewhere beneath her cold detachment was the calculation that I'd stay. That I'd fall in love with the baby before I remembered to hate the man. I understood the strategy. What she didn't understand was me. I wasn't built for submission. I was built for survival. I'd been abandoned before, but I never disappeared. I just learned how to wait. On the fourth day, the door opened like a spell breaking. He walked in as if the space hadn't changed. Like I wasn't holding the child he'd conceived with another woman in a house I never agreed to enter. He looked older. Not tired, worn. The kind of wear that comes from lying too long and getting too good at it. He paused when he saw me. His mouth moved like he wanted to say my name but couldn't decide how it sounded anymore. I waited. I wanted him to speak first. To choose his first lie carefully. He didn't disappoint. I meant to tell you, he said.
No hello. No explanation.
Just that. The sentence of a man who still thought I owed him grace. The rage I expected never came. Not then. Not the kind that shatters things. What arrived instead was a clarity so cold it almost felt like kindness. I stood, placed the baby in the crib, and walked past him like he wasn't real. I didn't ask whose child she was. I already knew. The timeline spoke for itself. Her age, the silence, the mother's smug delivery at the airport. It was all too perfect. He had been with someone else while I was planning our anniversary. And now, somehow, he'd convinced himself I should stay and help him fix it. It was complicated, he added behind me, like the sound of betrayal was an excuse if you made it soft enough. She wasn't supposed to keep it. I didn't think it'd affect us. As if that still existed. As if my presence in that nursery was love, not endurance. I turned only once. Not to confront him, but to look at him clearly. He still wore the cologne I bought him last Christmas. He still had the scar on his cheek from when we went hiking in Vermont. And his hands, his traitorous hands, still had the shape of a man who held things carelessly. I remembered those hands on my back when I cried about losing my job. Those hands wiping flour off the counter when we cooked barefoot in his kitchen. Those hands holding a phone. texting someone else while I was across the country, writing him love letters. He wasn't sorry. He was exposed. And like most men who mistake exposure for injustice, he believed the damage was mutual. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he said. I almost laughed. As if there was a version of this truth that wouldn't wreck the center of my life. I said nothing. I sat back in the chair and picked up Isla, who had started to cry again. I rocked her like I'd done for days. Not because I forgave him, but because I needed her calm, her peace, her breath against my chest to remind me that I was still here. I hadn't disappeared into the betrayal. I was awake inside of it. And that meant I could survive it. He watched me like he didn't know what I was thinking. That was the moment I decided not to leave. Not yet. Let him believe I was broken. Let him mistake my silence for surrender. Let him show me who he was without realizing I was already planning my exit. Because the thing about betrayal is, it's a kind of freedom. Once someone shows you what they're capable of, they can never hurt you the same way again. And that's when you start building. It was easier than I thought it would be, pretending. Pretending I wasn't shattered. Pretending the woman I used to be hadn't been left on a cold terminal floor with a baby in her arms, and her whole future ripped in half. I smiled when I needed to. I fed Isla with practice warmth, the kind of care that looked maternal if you didn't look too closely. I made grocery lists. I folded blankets. I asked about work, nodded through stories, touched his arm lightly during conversations. He mistook it all for forgiveness. That was the most insulting part. How quickly he relaxed back into the life he thought he still had. He didn't see the shift in my eyes. He didn't feel the silence stretching between us like a drawstring being pulled tighter. The prison wasn't the house. It was the role I played inside it. By the second week, I could predict his rhythms better than he could. He left by 7, returned at 6. Some nights he brought takeout. Others he cooked. He tried, in his way, to return us to something normal. But there was no normal left. Just performance. A man acting out penance, and a woman staging grace. I knew how to play that part too well. When you've been underestimated your whole life, pretending becomes second nature. He believed I stayed because I couldn't bear to leave, that my silence was submission, that motherhood had softened me. But he didn't see the notebook I kept hidden inside the vent in the guest bathroom. He didn't know about the voice memos I recorded after midnight when the house was dead. I documented everything, not for court, not for closure, but for clarity. I needed to remember the way he lied with ease, the way I smiled and planned in the same breath. Isla grew used to me. Her cries turned to whimpers. Her grip tightened around my finger during naps. She began recognizing the cadence of my footsteps, the lullabies I hummed, not his, mine. There was something infuriatingly pure about the way she trusted me, like she hadn't been born into the debris of something already broken. And yet, it was her innocence that anchored me. I didn't love her. Not yet. But I didn't blame her either. She was a consequence, not a betrayal. A symbol of how little he valued what we had. And in a twisted way, she gave me time. As long as I was there, mothering the child he failed to introduce, he thought I was healing. But I wasn't healing. I was studying, cataloging every gesture, every inconsistency, every story that didn't quite line up. There was one afternoon, subtle, quiet, when I felt the axis tilt. We were having coffee on the back porch. He brought out 2 cups, no sugar in mine, just how I liked it. He smiled like nothing had happened, like we were a couple who'd just adjusted to a surprise pregnancy and moved forward. I nodded when he talked. Asked about his brother casually. It was the first time I said his name since arriving. His face tightened, barely perceptible. "We don't talk much anymore," he said, looking past me. "Different values." I nodded again. It was a small thing, but I clocked it. His brother was a crack in the story, and cracks always lead somewhere. I held the cup to my lips and smiled. It was the first real smile I'd given in weeks. He thought it meant affection. What it really meant was, I found my door. Later that night, I took Isla for a walk around the block. A rare moment alone. I passed the neighbor who watered her plants like she was on display. She waved. "You're the one staying with Drew, right?" I nodded. Her brow wrinkled. "I thought he and that other woman were still?" She trailed off. I smiled again. "It's been complicated," I said, echoing his words like a ghost. She nodded slowly, unsure. The conversation was short, but it confirmed something I already suspected. He hadn't told anyone the truth. Not about me. Not about the baby. Not about the woman who left him with a child and no explanation. That made him vulnerable. And if he was vulnerable, he could be replaced. That night I found the spare phone in the utility drawer. A burner, probably for emergencies or secrets. He wouldn't miss it. Not with how little he paid attention to details outside himself. I powered it up, wiped it clean, and inserted the SIM card I'd been carrying since day 3. The only number I called was his brother's. It rang once. Then again. Then he answered. Silence stretched like gauze between us. It's me, I said. He didn't ask how I got the number. You okay? He asked, voice low, unguarded. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. You shouldn't be there, he added. That was when I knew. He already knew everything. Or enough. Enough to want me out. Enough to feel like the only real human in that whole bloodline. I'm not staying, I said. Not forever. He didn't ask when. He just said, tell me when you're ready. Then hung up. I stared at the wall that night. Isla curled on my chest. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't sad either. I was something else, something sharp and patient and almost holy. He thought I was folding back into the life he offered. But he didn't see the inventory I was keeping. He didn't know I was rearranging every piece of the story to write a different ending. I had time. I had silence. And I had a man who thought betrayal could be buried under routine. What he didn't know, what he'd never understand, was that silence, when wielded right, is a weapon. And I was about to use it. The first time I saw him again, it wasn't planned. I was standing in the fluorescent aisle of a pharmacy 2 towns over, clutching a bottle of gripe water and a pack of formula that wasn't the right brand, but close enough. Isla was in the car asleep. I hadn't meant to stop. I hadn't meant to see anyone. But I turned the corner and there he was, leaning over the cold medicine, sunglasses in his collar, same crooked posture I remembered from the Christmas party 2 years ago when we barely spoke. He looked up, blinked once, and then smiled like nothing about my life had shattered. Like I wasn't the woman who'd vanished into his brother's lie. You always did hate store lighting, he said, and I realized he remembered things I'd never told his brother. Small stupid things. Things that shouldn't matter but somehow did. I froze. My hand tightened around the formula like it was a lifeline. He didn't approach, he waited. Gave me the kind of stillness people forget is a kindness. I looked around the aisle, then back at him. It's not what it looks like, I said, the words automatic, rehearsed without intention. He shrugged. Doesn't need to be. You okay? That question, it broke something. Not because of what he asked, but how he asked it. No edge. No agenda. Just pure concern, like he hadn't already drawn the conclusions everyone else had. I nodded once. Then again. Then shook my head because lying suddenly felt too heavy. Didn't think so, he said. He reached out. Not to touch me, but to take the bottle from my hand and scan the barcode. This brand makes her gassy, he added. You want the liquid one. Bottom shelf. I stared at him, stunned. You know Isla? He hesitated. She's my niece, isn't she? We didn't speak much after that. He helped me pay, loaded the bags into the trunk, and watched as I buckled Isla back in. I saw his eyes shift. Not judgment, not pity, but something close to grief. Like he'd seen the price I was paying just to hold the facade together. He didn't offer to follow me. Didn't offer to help. Just handed me a folded receipt with his number scribbled in the corner and said, in case you want to talk. Or disappear. Then he walked away. Not toward the parking lot, but down the street like he'd come there on foot. Like the whole encounter had been a ghost of a plan he hadn't dared say out loud. I drove home with my pulse vibrating. That receipt stayed in my pocket for 3 days before I added the number to the burner phone and hid it back under the floorboard. After that, we found each other in places people don't usually meet. A gas station in a neighboring town. The bookstore with the half-price romance section. A drive-through 2 hours away from his family's estate where he passed me a coffee without speaking, and I took it like it was medicine. There was never a plan, never a date. We just showed up. And every time, he looked a little less like a man bound by blood, and a little more like a man trying to burn his lineage clean. He asked about Isla first. Always Isla. How she was sleeping. She was starting to roll. He never asked about his brother. He didn't need to. I saw the truth in the spaces between our words. He knew. He had always known what his brother was capable of. He just never seen someone survive it with their dignity intact. He told me once, during a shared silence outside a sandwich shop, that they'd stopped talking after the funeral. Our fathers, he said. I stayed late. My brother stayed loud. I didn't press him. Didn't need the details. I understood that kind of estrangement too well, when the person who shares your name stops sharing your values. I told him about the first time I saw his brother lie. How it was small. A skip detail, a fake memory he inserted into a story I lived. He rewrote things, I said. Even when he didn't have to. His eyes darkened. That sounds about right. He leaned back against the wall, one foot crossed over the other, and added, he doesn't believe in consequences. Just discomfort. That line, God, that line, it settled into my bones like prophecy. And it made me realize, my silence wasn't just revenge. It was prophecy too. A discomfort so slow, so calculated, it would unravel him by the hour. I didn't tell him my plan. Not outright. But he knew I wasn't staying, because I had nowhere else to go. He never treated me like a victim. And in return, I never asked him to rescue me. We were equals in the quiet. That's what made it work. When I brought Isla with me once, just once, to a park where no one knew our names, he held her like she was made of glass and history. She didn't cry. She stared at him the way she stared at stars from the crib mobile. I hung myself. And I think in that moment, we both realized she'd been born into something worse than a mistake. She'd been born into a game. And neither of us wanted to keep playing it. Back at the house, I played my role better than ever. I cooked. I kissed his cheek. I let him rest his hand on my back while we watched movies. He never noticed that I started sleeping on the other side of the bed. Never caught the missing photos from the hallway frames. Never questioned why Isla cried less and smiled more when we weren't home. He believed we were rebuilding. That we were healing. He even talked about getting away for a weekend. Just us. I said it sounded nice. What I didn't say was that I already had a destination in mind. And it wasn't a hotel. It was a registry office. 2 towns over. Under a different last name. That night, as I lay in the quiet, Isla asleep beside me, I finally whispered her name out loud. Not because I'd forgiven anything, but because I needed to remember what mattered. What I was protecting. What I was willing to burn the whole house down to rescue. Her name was my anchor now. But the fire? That came from somewhere else. It was a Tuesday morning when I realized I'd become invisible. Perfectly, exquisitely invisible. He sat across from me at the breakfast bar, scrolling through his phone, one hand half wrapped around a coffee mug I refilled without being asked. Isla babbled softly in her high chair, cereal smeared across her cheeks like war paint, and I watched him nod along to something on his screen, completely unaware of the silent ceremony taking place right under his roof. He thought this was healing. That we'd passed through the storm. That the quiet meant peace, not strategy. What he didn't realize, what he'd never be capable of realizing, was that I had memorized every inch of the performance he needed from me, and I was playing it with surgical precision. The lie wasn't in what I said. It was in what I stopped needing to say. I let him believe I had chosen this. That I had accepted my role in the new script he was writing. The rewritten version of our love story with the baby as an accidental footnote, and me as the woman who stayed because of maternal instinct. He kissed my forehead when he left for work. I smiled when he forgot to say goodbye. I folded his laundry with a tenderness so convincing, even I almost believed it. He didn't notice that I no longer asked him about his day. He didn't clock that I'd stopped sleeping through the night, because by the time he came to bed, I was already up, feeding Isla, pacing the hallway with my thoughts like loaded weapons. The quiet between us had turned into a second language. And in that silence I was rewriting everything. The wedding registry went live 2 weeks later.
No announcement. No fanfare.
Just a quiet entry with my name, his brother's name, and a date buried 3 months in the future. I chose muted colors, sage green and charcoal, and selected items that felt intimate but impersonal. A Dutch oven, matching robes, a travel fund. Enough to look real, not romantic. I submitted the paperwork from a public library 2 towns over, wearing a hoodie that wasn't mine and sunglasses too big for my face. I signed the application with a pen I'd stolen from his desk drawer. The same drawer where I once found a receipt for a dinner date he never took me on. I mailed the invite to myself that night, just to see how it felt. When it arrived 2 days later, I opened it with shaking hands and read my own name like it belonged to someone braver. The brother never asked why I chose him. He never tried to define what we were. He just kept showing up. Late-night phone calls, grocery runs, a quiet cup of coffee left at the doorstep without a knock. He knew I wasn't ready to leave yet. Knew I had to finish the story before I could walk out of it. And in that shared silence, we found something holy. Not love, not yet. But something cleaner. Something earned. He never touched me without permission. Never asked me for more than I could give. And somehow, that restraint was more intimate than anything I'd ever shared with the man whose name I still technically wore. I kept the engagement ring. Not out of sentiment but as a marker. I left it on the nightstand each morning, polished, pointedly placed. A symbol he could interpret however he wanted. To him it meant I was still here. To me it was a reminder of every moment I swallowed whole instead of spitting it back in his face. I'd started tracking his lies. Not the big ones, those were obvious, but the small ones. A meeting that ran late but didn't show on his calendar. A coworker's name that changed spelling across conversations. Receipts in the trash for gifts that never made it home. He was cheating again, I was almost sure of it. But I didn't care. That part of me had already died. I wasn't trying to save him anymore. I was trying to bury him. And still he never saw it coming. He told me I was glowing one night. That I looked stronger. Like motherhood suited me. I thanked him. Kissed his cheek. Tucked Isla in. And went to bed with my back turned toward him. He thought I'd forgiven everything. That's the problem with men like him. They confuse endurance with affection. He didn't see the woman beside him as dangerous, because I wasn't yelling. I wasn't crying. I wasn't leaving. I was just waiting. That night, he fell asleep next to a woman he thought he still owned. And I lay there counting ceiling tiles, memorizing the shape of my exit like a hymn. I began packing slowly, methodically. 1 item per day. A book tucked into the diaper bag. A favorite shirt folded beneath Isla's bassinet. The sketchbook he never asked about, hidden in the back of the closet where he used to keep his winter boots. The things I left behind were just as intentional. An old scarf he once complimented, a perfume bottle I hadn't used in months, the first mug we ever bought together. I wanted him to feel the echo after I was gone. Not a disappearance but a deletion. Like I'd never really been there at all. Only then would he start to understand what he'd lost. The last straw was quiet, forgettable. He forgot my birthday. Didn't even pretend to remember. That morning I made him coffee, kissed his shoulder, changed Isla, folded the laundry and waited. Not a card. Not a candle. Not a text. And I didn't mention it either. I just marked the moment. Circled it in my mind like a red string on a murder board and smiled. That night I called his brother. "It's time," I said. He didn't ask what I meant. He just said, "I'll be there." And I knew he would. He came home to silence. Not the kind that waits to be broken, but the kind that has no intention of ending. It wrapped around him the moment he opened the front door. Keys still dangling from his hand like they'd been caught midair.
No footsteps.
No baby laughter. No humming from the kitchen. Just stillness. The kind that makes you aware of your heartbeat, your breath, your guilt. He called my name once. Just once. Not loud. Not panicked. Just enough to confirm he expected an answer. When none came, he tried Isla's. But her name tasted wrong on his tongue now, and even he could hear it. He stepped further in, and the house seemed to shrink around him. The first thing he noticed was the air. Different. Not stale, emptied. Like the ghosts had packed their bags and left too. The second thing was the counter. Granite, cold and empty except for one object. My engagement ring. Polished. Upright. Sitting on the folded corner of the wedding invite I'd mailed to myself 3 weeks earlier and now mailed again to him. His name wasn't on it. Not even once. But mine was. And so was his brother's. The envelope was still half torn, as if he'd opened it while standing, still holding his keys, the moment his hand brushed the counter. I could almost see the way his eyes widened, the moment he realized the handwriting was mine. The same loops. The same lowercase e that dipped just a little too low. And beside that envelope, tucked barely beneath it, was a photograph of Isla. The only copy he didn't know I had. He didn't move at first. I knew he wouldn't. Men like him freeze before they feel. They try to logic their way out of what's already happened. He'd probably start with denial. Maybe it's a joke. Maybe she's visiting her sister. Then the voice would creep in. But she doesn't have a sister. And the baby's car seat is gone. He'd walk into the nursery next, expecting it to look untouched. But I'd taken everything. Every onesie. Every blanket. Every bottle. The crib mattress. Even the monitor. All that remained was the mobile, still spinning, still playing that low, tinkling melody like a lullaby with no child left to hear it. I wanted him to see that. I wanted him to know I hadn't rushed. That I'd dismantled my presence with care. That I'd rewritten the memory of us room by room, until there was nothing left to cling to. He opened the fridge next. He always did that when he didn't know what to say. Like food might solve what words couldn't. But the fridge was empty. I'd cleaned it before I left. Scrubbed the shelves. Left it spotless. Sterile. The pantry too. The trash bins outside were full. But only with things that wouldn't rot. Not a single crumb to trace me. Only the ring. The invite. The photo. And the silence he never thought could be weaponized. He opened the drawers. Called my name again louder now. But he wouldn't shout. Not yet. That would mean admitting fear. And he was still holding out hope. Hope that maybe I'd left on a whim. Maybe I was running an errand. Maybe I was at the park. But even he knew better. Because the TV remote was missing. The laptop was gone. The spare key he didn't know I had duplicated sat on the table with the wedding invite. I wanted him to know I didn't need his permission to leave. The neighbors wouldn't help him. I made sure of that. I'd been polite, quiet, forgettable. The kind of woman no one feels they truly know, which makes them slow to interfere. The woman next door saw me loading the car that morning. Isla strapped to my chest, bags packed with military precision. She waved. I waved back. She didn't ask questions. I didn't offer answers. She didn't see the brother waiting at the end of the street in the rental car with tinted windows, and his hand already resting on the wheel like he'd been waiting years for this moment. He didn't smile when I climbed in. Didn't speak. He just drove. Fast enough to feel like escape. Slow enough to know we wouldn't be followed. At some point, my ex would pick up the phone. Call his brother. Maybe to scream. Maybe to plead. Maybe to threaten. He wouldn't get through. The number was already changed. And even if it hadn't been, he wouldn't know what to say. Because how do you accuse someone of stealing what you never cared enough to keep? He might drive. He might beg their mother to call me. But she'd find her own silence waiting. Her number was blocked. Her legacy undone. The pacifier I'd left on the shelf of the nursery, still in its packaging never used, was the only sign I'd ever truly held anything together in that house. I wanted it there. I wanted him to look at it and understand. This wasn't abandonment. This was erasure. He'd tell himself stories. That I was unwell. That I was manipulated. That his brother had turned me against him. That I'd gone insane. Anything to avoid the truth that I left because I saw him clearly. Because I saw the life I was building and realized it wasn't mine. Because he handed me a future stitched with betrayal and expected me to wear it like it was silk. But I wasn't unraveling. I was redressing, reclaiming, disappearing not as a victim, but as an architect of absence. He would search, maybe even find where I'd gone. But it wouldn't matter. Because the door would stay closed. And by then I'd already have a new name. He started with denial. Not the loud, desperate kind, but the soft, manic version only cowards perform in private. He called the hospital first, pretending to be calm, pretending to be the kind of man who misplaces people instead of losing them. She might have checked in, he said. Like maybe I'd had a headache so severe I wandered into urgent care with a diaper bag, and left my engagement ring on the counter for dramatic effect. He described Isla's pajamas to the receptionist, his voice catching only once. They told him no one by my name had been admitted. He hung up. Waited. Called back. Used a different name. Still nothing. Then the silence crept in again. Not the one I left, but the one I carved into him. A silence with sharp teeth. Next he drove. Everywhere. Aimless. To the park. The market. The bookstore where he never saw me. He checked the post office, the pharmacy, even the car wash. Not because I'd ever take Isla there, but because panic does something to memory. It stretches time and shrinks logic. He thought he could trace my movements if he walked the steps backward. But he'd never paid attention when I was there. He didn't know where I liked to buy coffee. Didn't remember the library I always returned to. Couldn't recall the name of the boutique where I found Isla's knitted blanket. He had shared a life with a woman he never bothered to learn. And now that woman was gone, slowly, thoroughly, without apology. And every corner he turned only proved how little of me he ever really held. When denial cracked, he tried rage. Rage toward his brother mostly. The call went unanswered the first 6 times. On the 7th it connected. A hollow ring. Then voicemail. I'd listened to it once weeks ago, calm, direct, clipped. You know who you've called. Leave something worth hearing. He didn't. He just screamed. 3 minutes of breathless fury, broken up with the kind of sobs a man doesn't know how to make until something has been taken from him without consent. She's mine, he said, voice cracking. You don't get to rewrite this. But of course I already had. Not just the story but the frame. The authorship. The binding. He thought marriage was the conclusion. But for me it was just the prologue to a life he'd never be allowed to read. Their mother showed up 2 days later. I'd left a note for the nanny to expect her. She arrived wearing grief-like armor, lips thin, posture soldier straight. What did you do? She asked the moment she walked into his house. He didn't answer. Couldn't. She scanned the room like it might hold evidence. Crumbs, maybe, or the lingering warmth of a body recently disappeared. She found the invitation first. Then the ring. Her face didn't flinch. She only said, "So it's true." He tried to explain. Tried to twist it into something reversible. Some moment of confusion. A misunderstanding she could smooth over with her usual condescension. But there was nothing to spin. Not when the photo of Isla, left on the mantel like a signature, showed her in a new dress. In someone else's arms. He broke things that night. Dishes. A chair. His own voice. He didn't know where to put the rage, so he turned it inward until it burned holes. I wanted that, not his pain but his confrontation with the truth. That he was not the victim. That he had never been the victim. That someone could love him for years, hold his secrets, raise his child and still walk away without looking back. He hadn't just been left. He'd been studied, understood, silently outgrown. And that knowledge, that someone saw all of him and still chose to vanish, was more violent than any revenge I could have spoken aloud. He went to the old cabin the next day. The one near the lake where he and his brother used to fish when they were kids. He hadn't been in years. Not since their father died. But it was the only place he could imagine I might have run to. Somewhere off-grid. Somewhere sentimental. He didn't know it had already been booked out months ago. By me. Under my new name. For a weekend wedding with 20 chairs, a rented arbor, and eucalyptus hanging from the beams like prayers. The woman at the front desk remembered him. You just missed them, she said. He asked what name it was under. She checked the book. Read it out loud. And that's when his knees buckled. He sat on the cabin steps for hours, phone in hand, staring at nothing. Waiting maybe for me to call. I wouldn't. I'd already sent the final message. The version of me that loved him no longer existed. And the one that remained had nothing left to give. He didn't stay the night. Couldn't bear it. Couldn't bear the fact that I had made a home in a place they used to share. That I'd painted my new life over his memories without leaving a single brushstroke of apology. He drove back home in silence. Left the door open. Sat on the floor of the nursery and listened to the mobile spin. The following week, he tried to contest the wedding. Claimed coercion. Delusion. That I was unstable. That I'd kidnapped Isla. But he had no legal claim. No ring on my finger. No name on her birth certificate. Nothing but stories that no one believed because he was too late. Too loud. Too obvious. The brother didn't respond publicly. But I heard through quiet channels that he'd made one statement, to a friend in passing at a dinner where no one knew who was listening. She didn't take anything, he said. She just reclaimed what he gave away. The morning of the wedding was quiet. Not ceremonial. Not dramatic. Just still, like something sacred was being assembled without sound. The lake outside the cabin was still half covered in mist, the surface like glass, unbroken. I stood by the window in a white dress with no train, no lace. Just clean lines and long sleeves that made me feel less like a bride and more like a boundary. Isla was asleep in a makeshift crib beside the fireplace, her breath slow and even. She didn't know what the day meant, and that was the beauty of it. She didn't need it to mean anything. Her life wouldn't begin with noise. It would begin with choice. And I had finally made mine. This wasn't about love. It was about truth. Quiet, earned, unflinching truth. There were 20 chairs outside, arranged in 2 uneven rows beneath a canopy of eucalyptus and pine. No one was seated yet. The guests, if you could call them that, stood in loose knots, sipping coffee and whispering as if speaking too loud might undo the spell of this place. I hadn't sent out invitations the way most brides do. I sent personal letters. 1 line in each. This isn't about the beginning. It's about what I chose to end. That was enough. Most who showed up had seen pieces of me fall apart years ago. And now they were here, bearing witness to the reassembly, not as spectators, but as quiet conspirators in a life I rebuilt from silence. He stood at the front without nerves. Not smiling. Just waiting like he always did, with steadiness, with space. No tuxedo, just a black shirt, sleeves rolled, collar open. I liked that about him. He never tried to own a moment. He just stood in it, fully present. And when I reached the end of the path between the chairs, he didn't offer his hand like I needed saving. He just nodded. I stepped up beside him. No one asked, "Who gives this woman?" Because no one ever gave me away. I had been stolen once and I had taken myself back. This ceremony was not a transaction. It was a reclamation. A declaration that the name I'd carried, first his, then his brother's, would no longer be a possession. It would be a choice. Mine. The vows were not traditional. We didn't say forever. We didn't promise to heal each other. We promised something simpler. I told him I would never ask him to rescue me, and he told me he never wanted to. I promised to tell the truth, even when it made us flinch. He promised to stay, even when the silence got heavy. We said our full names. Mine with new letters at the end. His with history I had already forgiven. And then beneath a wooden arch that had once held fishing nets and now held dried roses and driftwood, we became something no one had expected. Not lovers. Not rebels. Just people who survived the same fire and decided to walk out together. Afterward there was no first dance. Just laughter that didn't ask for attention. A single table of food, mismatched chairs, no speeches. Someone passed around a Polaroid camera. No one asked for posed photos. The ones that remain are all soft focus and movement. Isla in the lap of a friend, my bare feet in the grass, him laughing mid-sip of coffee. The only formal picture we took was one of our hands, mine with the new ring, his with a freckle on the knuckle I hadn't noticed before. We didn't frame it. We just kept it in a box by the bed. Because the moment didn't need display. It just needed remembering. Back in the house he once owned, he sat alone. I imagine him wandering from room to room, waiting for the noise to return. Maybe he checks his phone. Still no new messages. Maybe he stares at the photo of Isla I left behind, trying to find his face in hers. I wonder if he ever looks at the pacifier still on the shelf, pristine, untouched. I hope he does. I hope he holds it just once and realizes it was never about the object. It was about the absence. The proof that some things once lost stay gone. Not out of malice, but out of mercy. Because not everyone deserves a second chance at redemption. Some just need to be left behind. People asked me later if it felt like revenge. If taking his brother's last name, walking away with the child he once forgot to introduce, leaving without shouting, if any of it was done to make him hurt. And the truth is, it wasn't. Revenge is too loud. Too temporary. What I wanted, what I built, was peace. The kind that settles in your bones when you finally stop trying to prove your worth to someone who never saw you. The kind of peace that doesn't need to be posted or explained. Just lived. And that's what I do now. I live. I wake up to silence that I chose. I walk barefoot through mornings that don't begin an apology. I tuck Isla in at night with stories I write myself. And when I sign my name on forms now, when I whisper it over the phone to make reservations, when someone asks, "How do you spell that?" I say it without flinching, without shame, without memory attached like a bruise. It is not his brother's name anymore. It is mine. Not because he gave it to me, but because I took it. And I made it new. Just like everything else. If this story gripped you from the first betrayal to the final vow, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more emotionally charged revenge stories that twist, unravel, and satisfy. New episodes drop weekly because justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it leaves quietly with the last word. See you soon in the next story.